Hey. You. Hi there. It's 4:19. Do you have a minute? Good. Then let's pack a bowl. 'Cause it's time for Cannabis Talk, a special 420 themed segment of the Almost Daily Zencast, hosted by spiritual cannabis mystic, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Let's get lit, folks! Yeah. Here we are again, together for the very first time. Welcome, my cannabinoid enthusiasts, my fellow fans of the green leaf, mystics, partiers, rebels, outlaws, what have you. We have a common bond, and that is the pot. And it's more than we've been allowed to thought. I didn't mean to rhyme that, but it did. I didn't really want it. I couldn't help myself. It's more than we've been allowed to think it is. But let's start somewhere else. Hey, cannabis friends and visitors, tourists, non-cannabis enthusiasts, dropping in to tune in and lend me your ears during this segment of the Almost Daily Zencast, which is, of course, explicitly focused on cannabis, and the only segment during which I overtly actually consume cannabis during the recording of. That is not to say that, the other segments are or are not very different from this segment, so much as that this segment is mostly green themed. I wanted to kick off today with a little bit of Trumptopia alert. Let's not let this fly under our radars, friends, especially if we are enthusiasts and fans of cannabis, either for medicinal or recreational or spiritual use, because this is one of those things where it's it may not be about it up front, but it could get turned into something about it through clever misuse, according to PBS NewsHour. On my Mac News app, there's a headline here that is alarming. The new this isn't the headline. This is the caption under the picture. According to PBS NewsHour, new HHS rules broaden the rules. I always hate it when words get redundantly used in their own sentences like that, but I digress. I'm not criticizing the author. It had to be written that way, I suppose. It just sounds funny. New HSS rules broaden the rules for healthcare workers who want to opt out of providing care and specific procedures because of their religious beliefs. Photo in the article by Regis. I can't pronounce that. Regis Duvignow. Duvignow? Duvignow. Not sure. I'm terrible at names. Please forgive me. Don't sue me. I have zero money. Okay, so, and he published that through Routers. Hooray! Hooray for Routers. They get great picture. It's a great picture. It's a really nice depth of field photograph of medical equipment. It makes you go, doctors. Gross. Okay, so, the headline of the article, and the reason why I'm dragging it into this segment. Here we go. What the new religious exemptions law means for your healthcare. And I stopped right there. I will be upfront, full disclosure, haven't really read the article. I just read the caption, and the headline, and I went, wow. And then I sort of scanned down, and I see LGBTQ in the second paragraph, and then in red, and highlighted in red, Trump touts, and this is a quote from the article, Trump touts new religious exemption allowing clinicians to refuse abortions. And I went, wow. And then I just stopped right there, full stop. I was like, wow. So everyone's going to argue about abortion, which is great. That argument should be had. I'm all for public discourse, right? That's why I host a show that I want people to call in on, or rather comment on the internet. Another easy way to do it, by the way, in case you're curious, is on the Sprecher website. You can chat at my show when I'm on live, but I don't record these things on like a regular schedule, so I understand why no one does that, but I aspire one day. But I digress. Here we are. Now, I didn't really particularly want to open the abortion can of worms. It's a minefield. But let's zoom back. What if someone's religion, and let's not argue about which religion, let's set that aside. What if some clinician somewhere has a moral objection, a religious moral objection to insert something here? And then, obvious example, the reason the second paragraph is about LGBTQ is because this will, like the wedding cake case, that's a tongue twister, man. Wedding cake case. You just get caught up on cake and your mouth wants to reset and not try to say the same consonants again. Okay, so like that case that involved a wedding cake, what if a doctor just refused to, upon discovery of someone's LGBTQ status, provide services that were in dire need, right? We're talking about life or death scenarios. They get rushed to a hospital, but it's a religiously affiliated hospital, right? Or the doctor, let's say it's not a religiously affiliated hospital, that doctor has a religious moral objection, and he doesn't find out until 20 minutes before the procedure. And then he's got to go, whoops, sorry, not me. I can't do it. And then the next doctor that's free happens to have just clocked out to go on his 4-day off because they work 72 hours a day, like too many days in a row. And it's like, what? It's too much. And there's a slippery slope, right? Like they can just start saying, like, I morally object. I have religious objections to this pomade. I can't give you a haircut. I have religious objections. Yeah. And to pull it into our segment here, how long before, and I ask you this, my friends, how long before Trump or some other incarnation, some other manifestation of this impetus from the extreme right of our political, ideological echo chamber system comes after cannabis and says, we have a moral objection to you using cannabis recreationally. Okay, well then we have to fight recreational all over again. Etc., etc. Slippery slope forever. Now, am I an alarmist? No, I don't think so. I'm the one saying, hey, everybody calm down. All the alarmists... Oh, also, by the way, magic number, 333. I just missed it. It's now 334. But there it was for a hot second. While I want to respect people and their religions, we have to contend with the reality that religious dogma and post-modern secular pluralist human rights-ism, if you want to call it that, to make up an ism, right? The idea of equal human rights amongst all people, regardless and irregardless, to use both words correctly, I think, if I may so pretend to know how to use them both correctly. I think that in this case, both can apply, is what I'm saying. Of their religious affiliation, of their practices or whatever, that everybody has a sort of equal set of rights, which makes me think, something I posted on Facebook from the memory section. Some days I don't do dick on Facebook, but birthdays and memories, and I'm like, I'm out. There's too much toxic waste going on. There's too many flat earthers. There's too many... is that still here? Let me read this. From 9 years ago, May 6, 2010, at 2:58 p.m., not terribly far off on the time. And it's obviously May 6th, that's no coincidence, it's from my memories section. Quote, to quote Thomas Jefferson, rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our own... Oh, hold on, that was me editing in my eyeballs. Rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. Period. Full stop. He then does proceed to say, I do not add, quote, within the limits of the law, quote, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual. End quote. Controversial. Thomas motherfucking Jefferson. Okay, so where do we draw the boundaries of a religious person's right to limit their exposure to activities that may be contradicted by the dogma that they adhere to, and other people's rights to freely engage in their free will as respectfully bound by the equal rights of all others that do not include religious dogma, right? Because although we've humorously linked the two in the using the phrasing, inserting the phraseology God-given, right? These God-given rights. Does God give us our right to bear guns? Does God want us shooting each other in the face over different cartoon versions of God? Is that what God wants? I have a whole argument because many people go, well, God tells us to fight each other in all the Bibles, right? Like if you extrapolate from Kleenex and call all the religious texts from all the different countries and all the different cultures Bibles, plural, like generic, right? Is that fair? Is that a fair use? That's rude, right? It's elitist and imperialist, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, and I say that with an absurdist, parodyist. What do you call a person who commits parody? A parodier? No, there's a name for that. Anyways, I digress. So, like, what's the difference between their religious rights to say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to make that cake, I want to vote to limit other people's rights because my religious freedoms say my religious dogma requires me to require this of my society, right? Like, where do you get to the point where you go no? And where do you get to the point in the other direction where you go no? Who decides what gets said no to? That's a question right there that I don't know the answer to, friends. But how long will it take them to be like, oh yeah, this is really, and the irony is, the great irony is, my dear cannabinoidally enhanced friends, is that there's actually quite a lot of humorous evidence, and to me it's humorous because it kind of looks funny. To postmodern eyes, to postmodern sensibilities, it looks a little goofy. But there's actual oldie-timey, religious devotee-created art representing lost references to material that would imply that the person we erroneously called Jesus Christ, as if that were his first name and his last name, which it is not. And I'm going to do a whole episode where I do a bit of a deep dive into this business. But there's images. I think they're either from mosaics in ancient churches or they're from illuminated Bibles from ancient time, and they clearly depict the person we erroneously call Jesus, who would more accurately be called Yeshua Christos. That would be a much more accurate name, or label, rather, to address him by. He's depicted preaching and or teaching and or practicing and or instructing and or discussing something in front of cannabis trees. Arguably, the subject of this talk might be cannabis. And in other art, he is depicted, and there is symbolism and symbology that connects him to the entheogenic magic mushroom and its set of chemical ingredients that the human body has curiously predetermined keyed receptors for, just like the endocannabinoids in cannabis. So, in a sidebar, this is important for the Venn diagram of communities. This is important too. And the first one is going to maybe not make sense right away, but veterans, fans of cannabis and other similar magical plants, religious versus spiritual norms and privileges and rights as another Venn diagram, people who believe in those things. The issue of the treatment of PTSD with either cannabis or Sorry, I did totally smoke a big fat bowl before I started this show. I really should know what's in a mushroom cap, but the alchemical names fail me, and the actual literal chemical names just don't want to come up. They'll pop out of my mouth in a hot minute. But y'all know what I'm talking about, right? These entheogenic plants are healing plants. And different communities have been involved in the preservation of this knowledge for many years. Different communities have been stumbling into the rediscovery of this understanding about entheogenic plants. And let's see if I can find that thing, because I saw it on the Facebook. And more public activism is being organized around the defense of individual or collective rights to continue to have access. Oh, it's funny. You know why magic mushrooms is sticking in my head so much? Is because the headline to the article that triggered me to think about this, that I saw either earlier today or yesterday, uses the term magic mushrooms and not any of the more clinical terms. We're going to pop that open. So this is from Channel 9 News, an NBC affiliate.
Here at American Furniture Warehouse, we didn't make room for new merchandise arriving daily. Now's
Sorry.
the time to buy. You'll find great deals.
American consumerism always finds a way. Always finds a way. My show has no advertising, takes no advertising dollars. That was one of those ads that just plays on a thing before you realize you even finished loading the page yet. So, Colorado, Channel 9, NBC affiliate news.com. That's not the name of the website. The name of the website is 9news.com. Colorado veteran used magic mushrooms to treat PTSD. Now he wants them decriminalized. Denver leaders worry that would make the city more of a destination for drug use. Quote, "My worst injury was PTSD and I didn't even know it yet," said Cal, is the individual being interviewed in the article. "6 months after I got back, I really started to dwell on the things I'd seen and things I'd done in the quiet moments." Psilocybin. Recent studies show that psilocybin or magic mushrooms may be effective in treating depression or anxiety and other disorders. A recent Johns Hopkins study monitored 51 terminally ill cancer patients with end-of-life fear after they took psilocybin in a clinical setting. 6 months after taking the drug, 80% maintained a decreased level of depression. Another study published last year, blah, 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 potential for abuse, low potential for abuse and aren't physically addictive. Ooh, that's important. Another study published last year shows mushrooms have a low potential for abuse and aren't physically addictive. Okay, friends, here I can back up. People often argue, oh, this is the fake news, blah, blah, blah. Well, or those medical institutions are all corrupt and evil, blah, blah, blah. One of the reasons why I created this segment of the podcast is because I wanted to address entheogenics. Specifically, and the healing properties of cannabis, psilocybin, and ultimately, of course, DMT. And that's nothing new. Joe Rogan's been doing it for years, and he's a mainstream celebrity and has never gotten into any kind of crazy trouble over it. The fact of the matter is, the system can't deny the facts. And increasingly, the medical community is going, hey, if it's a real thing, why not try to harness it and utilize it? Might as well get the research done and, let big pharma find a way to try to profiteer on it. And my argument, of course, is let's not allow the status quo to be the status quo. Cultivating a new culture. I was almost going to go for the alliteration of cultivating a new cannabis culture, but I almost also opted for cultivating a new entheogenic culture. We need a culture of scientific investigation and spiritual, I guess also scientific and spiritual investigation. I was going to try to do a different word there, but really, truly, we should investigate these things both scientifically and spiritually. It's not really a big leap plenty of people over my entire lifetime of observing pop culture, politics, etc., have been making the realization, the discovery, or connecting the dots amongst themselves between other people's experiences and coming to terms with it. And what I want to bring to the discussion is both personal real life experience and the direct knowledge of other people's, so, secondhand knowledge experience that I'm vouching for because I trust and believe the people who share these experiences with me. And to me, it is a great victory and no small step as both a mystic and a countercultural entheogenic enthusiast, someone who, and I don't party, right? But someone who's always been interested and intrigued by those who have done the work, like Terence McKenna and people of that ilk, as the phrase goes. And if you don't know who that is, look him up, yo. Many people have done the work of preserving his talks and recordings. Just make sure you're on something that somehow is maybe, authenticated and is really him speaking and not some weird, crazy knockoff trying to pass you crazy stuff. Because I think that's going to start happening more and more. But that's a whole nother issue, right? I've already talked about fake news industry and the frightening potentiality of what something like deep fake could do in other episodes. And I'm sure we'll have to come around and talk about it again in future episodes of this or some other segment. But I digress. As we build our new frontier, it's the wild, wild west right now. Fun, interesting personal news, right? So all of these things are happening. Trump's trying to put religious exemptions in healthcare. Other people of unlikely origins, military veterans, who you wouldn't normally think of as they're hippie, crazy, weirdo drug users, right? They're saying this stuff has scientific evidence that qualifies it for further investigation. We really need to decriminalize and get treatment going, right? So these two things are gonna, if not clash, definitely build a lot of tension. And here we are in the middle, those of us who are basically essentially reduced to individual members of the consumer end of the community, we are often, I hear this from people, left feeling sort of helpless and lost and unsure what to do. And we just want to explore and experience both the healing and the entertaining aspects of having a, dare I use the word, a relationship with cannabis. There's a lot that we could get into discussing entheogenics at large. And I'm not advocating for an indiscriminate use, right? I'm not saying go party your brains out till you fall over. That's silly. You shouldn't drink too much water too, because if you force feed yourself water, you might hurt your internal organs. Duh. But that's a thing. With moderation and with the temperance of a collective understanding that we are all in need of healing, and that these plants, which have long been vilified and mischaracterized, categorically can seem to prove to the world for themselves that they are capable of facilitating the act of healing. We have to build a culture that honors that at its core, in my humble opinion, right? It's great and all that we've bridged the gap of let's let it be something we can use recreationally because it isn't any more dangerous than alcohol. I've already gone on a rant about that comparison and what a inaccurate parallel it draws. But my point is larger, and I don't mean to drone on about it. I do think that each of us, as we decide whether we are going to participate in cannabis use, whether we're not going to participate in cannabis use, that we should not allow it to be minimized or reduced or, hijacked either by the political machines that would use it as a pawn of fear-mongering, or as a pawn of whatever you'd call the progressive ends tactics. Hope-mongering, I guess. And that we get real, constructive, progressive, thoughtful, balanced, equitable, and just laws, not just at the state-by-state level, but ultimately at the federal level. And why do I point to laws? Because like I was saying in Good Morning Trumptopia today, we have to sort of stop binding ourselves to this polemic thinking that the only options are non-participation, total statism, or some radical revolution that destroys the system. We have to sort of understand how we have organized our world in order to comprehend what needs healing, what needs reform, what needs change, and what needs being replaced. But I've already rambled about that a bit too at the end of that past episode. Dear friends, if you consider yourself either a medicinal patient of cannabis, a spiritual practitioner who utilizes cannabis, a recreational enthusiast who thinks it's just a dope-ass way of life to smoke weed at whatever recreational instances you feel are appropriate, let us rally together around this gift from the gods, as some of us quite openly call it, and not get distracted by the artificial culture of the consumerist machines that are deploying themselves to try to turn this into one of those big mega industries, right? That's happening. So we got to keep an eye on that front. And we also simultaneously have to help the industries that aren't that grow, so that there's the healthy example for all other industries to look to of what the opposite of a corrupt, evil, big megacorp is. What do you call that? I think cannabis is the ally, the product, the natural, organic, healthy, spiritual, transcendent thing, the entheogenic, magical gift from the goddess of earth that can help us as a tool of progress, as a tool of economic growth, as a tool of social and cultural self-examination, because we have to have these conversations, right? We ultimately have to have these conversations with our friends and neighbors who are not supporters and enthusiasts, especially if they themselves are in need of some of the healing that this plant can offer them, or they have friends and family that are in need of the healing that this, and I didn't mean to omit the others in my first iteration of that statement, that this cannabis and these other entheogenic, quote-unquote, magical plants like psilocybin, like DMT, that have a really solid base of evidence, experiential evidence, to indicate that they have healing properties beyond that which we are allowed to consider, right? We're just not allowed to even consider what good it would do to the human psyche, not just to manage anxiety or dampen its effects, but rather to, according to some of the other literature I've read, not this particular article I had just pulled up, but other literature I've read about psilocybin, it facilitates the healthy regeneration of the what's the mylar-like coating? It's got a funny word that kind of sounds like mylar, mylopian. It just helps regenerate, the tissue that some of these problems we have might be being, triggered by or exasperated by, and overall facilitates neural network regeneration and growth. Nature has ways of operating that are quite mysterious. Nature quite literally does, magical things in mysterious ways. And it's no accident. I'll leave you with this thought, guys, before I ramble on for way too long. There's this great graphic that I tried to help foster its meme virility. It's a chart that someone mapped out of the tree of life, essentially, but not the tree of life as we know it in any of the systems that everyone's done research on, but rather it's like a flow chart of the relationships between different species. Guess what it looks like, guys? Or have I already talked about this in this segment? It's a big fucking spiral. All the branching family lines of different animals, different plants, different creatures from all over the planet. And I don't know how exhaustive the list is, but it's a whole circle, right? Like the list of all the creatures that are genetically related to other creatures, and how they relate. Like it's like they have this huge list in a circle, in a giant circle, and on that list is human beings. So we'll close with this note. By the way, in other news, there's a new report out that the way the status quo is right now is threatening over 1 million species of life to extinction. And extinction, you can argue all you want about evolution. Extinction is a hard, cold, credible, undeniable, undebunkable fact of human life. You can argue about whether or not climate change is caused by people still a little bit, because numbers are at a scale that you can definitely wedge arguments into them. But the simple fact that the list of species that were known to exist and have ceased to exist, most of which due directly to human activity involving literally butchering, like killing them, eradicating them, and others more passive activities, it's undeniable, right? Like this is a very long and exponentially growing list. And the new report says that the growth of that list is speeding up at such a rate that within our lifetimes, I don't remember the exact timeline that they set out in the report, but that very soon, over 1 million species of living things that are alive now will be totally wiped out. And, rolling back to the earlier set of thoughts I was trying to connect this to, we need to radically change how we relate to nature, right? And that's one of the subject matters that it appears, above and beyond just facilitating basic healing, that meditation and some sort of spiritual practice that utilizes or incorporates entheogenic plants. There seems to be much evidence from personal testimony of people who I've either read or heard from directly in person, eyeball to eyeball, face to face, that these plants facilitate a what's the word I'm looking for? A disengagement of the sort of radical denial of where we're at. Like it just helps facilitate that, like opening up of one's understanding that we can't keep going in the direction that we're going. Anyways, I'm spiraling, rambling out of control. This episode has gone on for 40 minutes already. And, right. So, what's my point? Let's be vigilant, folks. Let's be vigilant goats. What did I just say? Let's be vigilant, folks. Or friends. Friends is better, right? Hey, friends. Let's be vigilant. Let's be thoughtful. Let's be present. Let's be aware. Let's be mindful. Let us be cautious and conscious about what we strive for as we move forward. And remember that the creation of a culture, there's another meme that I wish I had thought of before I started this recording, because I don't think I'll find it now, but it's one of those really controversial memes that's making the rounds right now, and I've seen several friends share. And it's that it says something about how culture was meant to be shared and exchanged, right? Like culture as a thing that people do, that the human species expresses, was meant to be shared and exchanged, right? Just like art, like hairstyles. You go somewhere else and you're like, oh wow, they're doing their hair this way over here. I'm gonna check that out. And they look at you and they're like, oh, you like the way your hair is. You cut your hair, I'll cut mine like yours. Whatever. That's like a really shitty example, but you get my point. And so the rest of the meme was a challenging question asking, like, if that's true, then is it reverse racist to call white people racist for taking an interest in incorporating black culture into their white culture, that which we call cultural appropriation by leftover imperialist elitist thinking, is complaining about that some sort of anti-racism. And the question is, of course, in my humble opinion, my dear friends, and anybody who listens along will probably will chime in and go, yeah, okay. The answer to that question is nonsense, folks. Nonsense to the argument being implied by the question. And the simple fact is, zooming back to that thing I talked about earlier, the spiral, right? Like the genome of all the species, that's not how you may say the plural of species, of all the species, plural, they all spiral back to one unity, yo. So if human beings share 75% genetic identical material with cabbage and most plants, which I think is a legitimate, like, scientific genetic fact, plants and mammals inherently share 75% of the same kind of genetic material. Like, we all share in the same building blocks, right? Like, think about that. We're arguing about different races of people when the entire scope of life is one thing. We're being silly. Now, there is such a thing as culture. There is such a thing as perhaps like a sort of tribal, familial, cultural legacy, heritage. Sure, I'll give you that. And I guess you could say there's a thing that you might call ethnicity. The regionalization of our species into some sort of like, oh, we have these blocks of qualities that we generically associate exclusively to those zones. But those are expressions of the genome expressing an infinite variety of form and are as irrelevant as hair color is to the argument of who is a better human being. Because everybody is a human being. Human beings at the species-wide level, and I've said this before and I'll say it again because it's fucking worth reminding people. Genetically identical, folks. We're all clones of clones of clones. Now, we have the sophisticated enough ways of measuring your genome now to be able to talk at length about the differences and the nuances and what those might imply or suggest about you, your body, your past and your future, which is great. But when you zoom out and look at the whole, all human beings are basically genetically identical. The nuance is the differences are such a small percentage number of the genome that it is an absurd tragedy to be angry, hateful, spiteful, rude, and outright, violent against each other because of this idea that we have invented. And I'll stop rambling because that's what I got to say about that. As always, friends, thank you for tuning in. May peace, love, and grooviness and elevated frequencies blossom in your chakras, yo. Well, folks, that bowl is cashed and dusted. Thank you for joining me for yet another most excellent session of Cannabis Talk. Stay lit, pay it forward, and remember, the world needs healing, and cannabis heals. Until next time, I have been your spiritual cannabis mystic talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. For coughing. As my old